Welcome to EPG Padashala. I am Dr. Shamla, Department of Philosophy, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Pioneer Regional Center, Kerala. In this paper on Indian religion and philosophy, now we will have a module on Kashmir Saivism. In this module, the important points that I would like to bring to your notice is the origin and development of Shaiva Siddhanta and Kashmiri Saivism, and also the history and literature of Kashmiri Saivism or Triga system, the three branches of Kashmir Saivism, and finally the main doctrines of Triga system, including its epistemology, metaphysics, and that of bondage and liberation. Coming to this Kashmir Saivism, as an introduction, we can say that whenever great revolutions took place in the history of Indian philosophy, we always, or the philosophers always sought for their guidance to the Upanishads. And next to Upanishads, we can see there was a place to Gita, which was an effort to present the treatise embodying the essence of Upanishads. That is, Gita contains the essence of Upanishads. After Gita, the great edifice of Vedanta philosophy followed, which was founded upon Upanishads. Following this, there arose a desire in some thinkers to combine the theistic creeds with the Upanishadic doctrines. As you all know, theism developed mainly into two directions, that is Vaishnavism and Shaivism, where Vishnu was considered as Supreme God and Shiva was considered as Supreme God respectively. And the mixing or amalgamation of Vedanta with Vaishnavism led to the philosophies of Ramanuja and Madhva, that is Vishishtadvaita and Dvaita, etc. And there was also a corresponding effort made by the thinkers to combine Shaivism with Vedanta, and that resulted in the system of Shaiva Siddhanta. And here Shiva is treated as the Supreme God or ultimate reality. Among the worshippers of Shiva, the main cults are the Pashupata, Kapalika, Kalamukha, Linkayada cult, Kashmir Shaiva, and Shaiva Siddhanta. With this brief introduction, let me move on to the history and literature of Kashmir Shaivism. Now let us have a brief look into that. Coming to the literature or history, we can see that the system is called Kashmir Saivism because it has a voluminous literature and the writers mainly flourished in Kashmir. Might be because of that it is called Kashmir Saivism. And we can see that there was a tremendous influence of Buddhism upon its development. And because prior to the development of Buddhism in Kashmir, Shaivism was confined to a simple form of worship. It is because of the influence of Buddhism, the concept of Shunyata was introduced, and the metaphysical foundation for the growth of integral Advaitism with the Shaiva traditions begins here. Hence, we can say that Kashmir Shaivism represents the absolutistic development of Shaiva tradition and is described as absolutism or Ishvara Dvaya Vada. Here we can see the influence of Shankara on Kashmir Shaivism because we cannot deny the fact that it was because of the visit of this great master or Acharya of Advaita Vedanta that cleared the way for the rise and advancement of Shaiva absolutism in Kashmir. And this Kashmiri Shaivism actually is based on Shaiva Agamas or Tantras, which are accorded the same authority and status as Vedas. While briefing through the literature, we can see that the eminent writers of this Kashmir Shaivism include Vasugupta and Somananda, Utpaladeva, Abhinavagupta and Kshemaraja. It is also called as Spanta or Trika system. It is called as Trika system because it accepts mainly a triad, Siddha, Namaga and Malini, out of the 92 agamas recognized by it. And it may be because it explains three modes of knowledge of reality: non-dual, cum, dual and dual. Here you can see a picture of Abhinavagupta, who was a writer to this Shaiva, important writer of this literature of Kashmir Shaivism. It is called, as I told you, it is called Triga system. Another name for it is, much more popular name, it is Pratyabhijna system. And this literature of Triga system is called Triga Shastra, Triga Shasana or Rahasya Sampradaya. And it can be broadly classified into three: Agama Shastra, Spanda Shastra and Pratyabhijna Shastra. So we can say that the literature of Kashmiri Shaivism is divided into three: Agama Shastra, Spanda Shastra and Pratyabhijna Shastra. First, let us look into the details of Agama Shastra. Agama Shastra is believed to have been revealed, and it is regarded as of superhuman authorship. It was not written by any of the human authors. And among the Agamas, the chief ones or the important ones which we can say is Malini Vijaya, Swachanda, it is Vijnana Bhairavi, Migendra, Madanga, it's Netra, Naishwasa, Swayambhuva and Rudrayamala. It lays down both the doctrine or jnana and the practices for the system. And this is believed to have come down through ages from teachers to the students. And as I told you, it was not an authorship of human. And you may ask, how did it come into being? It is said that the authorship of this Agama Shastra is attributed to Shiva himself. And it is said that it was revealed to Vasugupta, who must have lived towards the end of 8th or 9th century. 8th or beginning of 9th century actually. And this work is also called Shivobhanishad Sangraha. On the sutras of this work, there are vritti, and of this vritti we don't know about the authorship, and it's doubtful actually. And then there is Vartiga of Bhaskara, and its commentary based on this by Vimarshini by Kshemaraja. This is what we have got about these Agama Shastras. And now let us move on to the details of Spanda Shastras. Spanda Shastras lays down the main principles of the system in greater detail and in a more amplified form than the Shiva Sutras. But they never enter into the philosophical investigations of it. The treatises belonging to this Shastra are Spanda Sutras or Spanda Karigas and a vritti by Kallata, who was a disciple of Vasugupta. The vritti together with sutras or karagas, altogether this shastras together are called Spanda Sarvasva. And the Spanda Sutras are based on Shiva Sutras and is in the form of commentary, which only enunciates the principles in full detail. It just gives the details of that commentary. Now, after completing Agama Shastras and Spanda Shastras, we can go to the third literature part, that is Pratyabhijna Shastra. And here we see that Pratyabhijna Shastra is the philosophy proper of Triga or Kashmir Shaivism. Pratyabhijna Shastra represents the stage of philosophical systematization actually. And the stage may be regarded as the central philosophy of monastic Shaivism of Kashmir. Here we see that Advaitism was explicitly established by the authors of the spirit. And we see that while Vasugupta propagated the monastic doctrine merely as a revelation or as a faith, it was left to Somananda to lay the philosophical foundation of Shaiva Advaitism. And Somananda, a pupil of Vasugupta, is considered as originating the reasonings in support of Triga system. He actually started the reasoning part of Triga system. Other important works based on these branches include Shiva Drishti by Somananda himself and Ishvara Pratyabhijna or just Pratyabhijna by Utpala. In his Shiva Drishti, we see that Somananda provides ontological and epistemological basis for this Shaiva absolutism. And it was left to Utpala Deva to make a commentary on this Ishvara Pratyabhijna Karigas, and this is also a significant works on Kashmir Shaivism. While going on through these works, we can see that while facing the opponent on two fronts, the Atmavada and also the Anatmavada, the Pratyabhijna writers were jealously guarding the theistic spirit of Shaivism. And the role of Utpala actually was only the summarizing the teachings of his master Somananda. So, Pratyabhijna is regarded as only a reflection of the wisdom taught by Somananda. In short, and it's a short and compact work and has assumed such an important position in the whole system of Kashmir Shaivism, that is, the whole system of Kashmir Shaivism is known as Pratyabhijna Darshana outside Kashmir. Outside Kashmir it is known as Pratyabhijna Darshana because of this importance of it has given. And we see that Madhvacharya in his Sarva Darshana Samgraha, he has referred this Kashmir Shaivism as Pratyabhijna Darshana. And of these three branches of Kashmir Shaiva literature, actually, the first is Agama Shastra, and it is attributed to Lord Shiva itself. And it is in the form, and in the Tantra section of this Shastra, Shiva is explaining the doctrines and principles of Shaivism as answers to Parvati to her questions. He laid out the principles in a very compact form and he revealed it to Vasugupta. And the second one was originated by Vasugupta himself or by his pupil Kalata. The third was founded by Somananda. Hence, we can say that Vasugupta and Somananda can be regarded as a human founders of Kashmir Shaivism because Lord Shiva is credited with non-human authorship. And of these two, while Vasugupta gave importance to revelations and articles of faith, it was left to Somananda to lay the foundations or philosophical foundations of Kashmir Shaivism. Now, we had a brief look into the literature of Kashmir Shaivism. Let us move on to the next topic, that is three branches of Kashmir Shaivism. According to K.C. Pandey and some other modern writers, along with Pratyabhijna, the Shaiva monism also includes Krama and Kaula branches. Now we will have a look into that branches of Kashmir Shaivism. Coming to Krama, it is a Krama system. In the Krama system, we see that the worship of Shakti occupies an important place. The means adopted here is called Shaktopaya. While Kaulism might be described as a path of will, and Pratyabhijna as a path of recognition. Krama is essentially a path of knowledge or reflection. That's the difference between these three. That is, Kaulism described as a path of will, Pratyabhijna is a path of recognition, and Krama is a path of knowledge or reflection. Absolute might be described both as Shiva and Shakti. Some of the followers of Krama consider Kali to be important, and we find that the conception of 12 forms of Kali occupies an important place in Krama. The next is, after discussing about the important points in Krama, let us move on to this Kaulism actually, and this is another branch of Kashmir Saivism. Here Lord Shiva is considered as a real originator of all forms of Kaulism. As the term indicates, it describes the path in which attempts are made to unite Kula and Agula, which is Shakti and Shiva. Anupaya or Pratyabhijnobhaya is the highest state in Kaulism. And the experience of the highest bliss is called Jagadananda. And it is possible only when all forms of vital air enter into the central nerve or Sushupna. It is an experience of the perfect unity of Shiva and Shakti, the realization of Anuttara. Release has been described as Kauliga Siddhi. And here, in this state of release, Kaula attains union with Bhairava. Now let us move on to the third branch of Kaulism, that is Pratyabhijna. And it, as we have dealt it earlier, it is an important contribution of Kashmir Saivism to Indian philosophy. And though Krama and Kaula were prevailing in some form or other, Pratyabhijna is altogether a new concept, and that is why the entire Kashmir Saivism has been called under that name. And unlike Kaulism, the person who is sadhaka has a perfect freedom in Pratyabhijna system. These are the three branches. Now we have discussed the three branches of Kashmir Saivism, that includes Krama, Kaula and Pratyabhijna. Now let us move on to the important aspects of philosophy. First, let us start with the epistemology of Trika system or Kashmir Saivism. According to this absolutistic Shaivism, the attainment of the highest self is possible only through the investigation of the ultimate source of knowledge of objects. As you all know, epistemology means it's the theory of knowledge. Here let us see what Kashmir Saivism has in it about the theory of knowledge, as its theory of knowledge. And here we see that Shiva is the absolute. Parallel to Advaita, Advaitic Brahman, we see here Shiva as an absolute. And all our objective consciousness ultimately ends in universal self. The aim of this system is to help the individual in attaining self-realization. Here also we see a parallel to Advaita system. Now coming to the another important aspect is this: final release is possible only when the self, or when the veil of ignorance is removed from the self. And it gives importance to knowledge in practical life also. Here also we see the influence of Advaita and the absoluteness of knowing the subject is by the amalgamation of knowledge, situation, in the case of recognition actually. And now let us see what recognition actually means in this Kashmir Saivism. Recognition is actually an act of cognition which consists in the unification of the past and present experience. We all have many experiences, past and present. It's a unification. Recognition is a unification of these experiences. You might find it similar to memory, but it differs from memory in the sense that while the object of previous experience is absent in the case of memory, it is present in the case of recognition. It is a knowledge that object given in the present perception is identical with an object which we know previously. The identification is possible only if the veil of ignorance is removed. Similarly, in the case of recognition of the highest self, there are two images in the mind of the individual. First is the image of the finite derived from self-experience. It is a knowledge almost all of us have. The other is the self. Other knowledge is formed by the study and reflection of the continuous study and reflection of the scriptures. And ultimate recognition of the highest self, which consists in the identification of the two images, depends upon spiritual instruction, or that is what we mean by Diksha. Pratyabhijna is a faculty which enables the individual to attain self-realization even without the help of Diksha. And according to it, doctrine of all knowledge or action, whether in Sadashiva, that's the highest ultimate reality, or in a worm, the lowest, really belongs to the absolute subject. Unless willed by the absolute, this knowledge is not possible. So, with this, few words on recognition. Let us now move on to the nature of knowledge. The nature of knowledge as it is given in Kashmir Saivism. According to this Kashmir Saivism, knowledge is nothing but self-consciousness, being affected by a variety of manifestation brought about by subject himself. The power of knowledge, essentially the light of consciousness and action, is nothing but vimarsha, which is essentially freedom and has its being in pragasha. Freedom is the essence of the light of consciousness. Ultimately, all knowership belongs to the absolute non-dual subject. He is a real knower. In all acts of knowing, the ultimate subject of every judgment. Knowledge is the union of subjective and objective waves of consciousness. And it is also called as anubhava, which implies that subject is becoming one with the object. While we are dealing with the epistemology, we know that we have to deal with the means of knowledge in it, and it is called pramana in Indian philosophy. Now let us have a look into the important pramanas in Kashmir Saivism. Pramanas are important in Kashmir Saivism, and in order to justify their view that empirical knowledge is not erroneous. We have some empirical knowledge while we are living. That's not an error. And the Shaiva Absolute discusses the real nature of well-known means of right knowledge and their effect. Knowledge is means to right knowledge is called pramana, and its effect is called pramita. All pramanas, being dependent upon the self, really depend on Shiva in producing the knowledge of the object. The chief characteristic of pramana is its capacity to produce ultimate knowledge, which essentially contains the use of words. And pramana may be described as the means of knowledge which is not proved to be false later on with the experience of opposite nature. So pramana means that it's a knowledge which cannot be made false after some time. It's essentially the light of consciousness, and ultimately samvit or chit is the only pramana. The various means of right knowledge and the intellect, etc., are nothing but different manifestations of the activity or Chit Shakti. The different means, when we talk about the different means of pramanas, it's just the activities or manifestations of the Chit Shakti. And the efficacy of pramanas consists merely in removing the veil of ignorance. The veil of the ignorance has to be removed so as to we have to realize the absolute, ultimate reality, Shiva. But in reality, both ignorance and the removal of ignorance are manifestations of the ultimate consciousness. Hence, Kashmir Saivism says that Chiti is the only pramana. Perception involves many acts, and will of them are taken to be one as they lead to one result, namely the judgment. Coming to inference, we see that inference, according to this Kashmir Saivism, like perception, is also dependent upon the light of the self. But there is a difference, because inference is confined to the spatio-temporal limits, where there is a scope for vyapti or invariable concomitance. And ultimately we see that all relations are dependent upon the power of arrangement or the Niyati Shakti of Lord. Agama is the strongest determinate thought of the absolute self at the transcendental level. Any collection of such thought in language which is helpful for arousing thought in the believer is also a valid pramana. We can give examples as Vedas. For those who believe in Vedas, they are true, and those who do not believe, they do not exist. It does not exist, that's all. And coming to this part of memory, this is also an important aspect of the epistemology. Kashmir Saivism accepts memory as an important possible method, and knowledge would not be possible without memory, it says. Memory itself is not a form of error actually, but a form of knowledge according to Kashmir Saivism. And all transactions depend upon, as all our transactions, daily transactions depend upon memory. Kashmir Shaivites says that it's not possible to consider memory as an error. The phenomena of knowledge is nothing but the power of self-manifestation of consciousness according to Kashmir Shaivism. And the power of knowledge has three aspects: the power of knowing or Jnana Shakti, the power of remembrance or Smriti Shakti, and the power of differentiation or Abohana Shakti. And the whole practice depends upon this triad of powers. This is in brief about the pramanas of Kashmir Shaivism. And let us now discuss about the Abhasavada. And the Shaiva theory of knowledge is also the theory of creation, and it's called theory of creation or manifestation actually, and it's called Abhasavada. Abhasavada is both epistemological and an ontological theory. And knowledge is nothing but I consciousness being affected by a variety of manifestations brought about by the subject himself. The subject manifests itself as the object of knowledge, and the object has no existence independently of the subject. All changes happening is confined to the realm of union or separation of the different abhasas. And this union and separation of abhasas is actually controlled by the power or niyati or order of universal consciousness. Or the Lord alone has a power to unite or separate the various abhasas. Thus, we see in Kashmir Shaivism, it accepts the self to be the ultimate subject, all-knowing, and so this attempts to establish the dependence of everything upon the self, that is, absolute self or Shiva. Here we can have a picture of creation or we can see how this is moving in the 6 realms to the infinite vibration. It starts from earth to water realm, then to the fire realm, and to the air realm, ether realm, and mind realm, and finally reaches the unmodified reality of Shiva. This gives us a basic idea of the metaphysics of Kashmir Saivism, and now let us move on to this aspect, since we have discussed about the epistemological aspect before. Coming to this metaphysics of Kashmir Saivism, reality here is considered both as transcendent and immanent. As transcendent, it is described as Shiva, and as immanent, it is described as Shakti. And here, Shakti and Shiva are not two separate realities, but two phases of the same reality. And they usually make use of a comparison of fire and the burning capacity of fire. That cannot be separated. It's just like that, Shiva and Shakti. And Shakti is always the state of perfect identity with Shiva. But for the purpose of clear understanding, two are distinguished only in thought. Shakti is Shiva's power. This is called Chit Shakti, or the power of Chit to reveal itself, to know itself. And the Trika makes 5-fold distinctions of the fundamental modes of Shakti. And these aspects of Shakti are Chit, Ananda, Ichha, Jnana, and Kriya. It is Chit, Ananda, Ichha, Jnana, and Kriya. Chit is the power of the Shakti, or power of self-awareness. And Ananda is the power of absolute bliss of everything. Ichha is Shiva's power of absolute will to manifest the universe out of himself. And Jnana is the power of knowing the inherent relations of all manifestations. Through Kriya, this is the power to resume any form. Different forms can be resumed only through Kriya. And these are the five aspects of Shakti. And since there is nothing apart from or independent of Shiva, the elements of the universe can be nothing but Shiva himself. Srishti, or creation, is nothing but self-manifestation and is described as opening out, or Unmesha, and Pralaya is closing down, or Nimesha. It is described again as opening out of a flower from a bud, and it's like going back to the petals. And Srishti and Pralaya follow each other, and it's a never-ending process. Each is a successive in the universe, and it's determined by its predecessor, by a kind of causal necessity. Coming again to Shiva, we can see that he has 5 eternal functions. They are Tirodhana, Srishti, Sthiti, Samhara or Pralaya, and Anugraha. The universe, which is a system of limited subjects and objects, cannot come into manifestation without or unless Shiva assumes limitation. And this power of obscuration or self-limitation of Shiva is called Tirodhana. And Shiva also goes for another secondary limitation with the help of Maya, and then it is called as Purusha. Though Shiva is in his own form, it's eternal, all-pervasive, omnipotent, and omniscient, while enjoying consciousness and Purusha, he is limited in the space and has limited knowledge. And the atomic Shiva, which is in Shuddha Maya, is shrouded by 5 conjugas or covers of Maya, and they are Kala, Vidya, Raga, Kala, and Niyati. Maya and these 5 conjugas together, with the 25 tattvas, including Purusha, make up the 31 categories which constitute the empirical world of finites. The 5 higher categories of Shuddha Maya represents the stages of progressive unification and make up the total 36 categories of the system. The basic limitations Anava Mala is reinforced by two other impurities, that is Maya Mala and Karma Mala. Maya Mala represents the whole series of categories and Karma Mala is responsible for the continuing the fetters of embodiment. It is due to this impurity or Mala that Purusha becomes subject to good and bad acts and is entangled to births and deaths. And Triga accept that all great dissolutions during which all these categories lower than Maya are absorbed into the Maya, their cause. Here we can see a picture which gives a metaphysical aspect of Kashmir Saivism. You can have a deep look into it and the categories given in that 36 tattvas. This is a brief idea about the metaphysics of Shaivism, Kashmir Shaivism actually. And now let us move on to this, the last part of our discussion, that is bondage and liberation. As we have told about Karma Mala and other Anava Mala, here Triga system or Kashmir Shaivism recognizes three types of bonded soul in bondage. And when a soul has only the Anava Mala, it is called Vijnana Kala. When it's both Anava and Karma Malas, it is known as Pralaya Kala. And when it has all the three Malas, it is designated as Sagala. There are 5 different stages of removal of this atomicity so as to attain liberation, and this consists of Sat or Shuddha Vidya, Ishvara, Sadhakya or Sadhashiva, Shakti and Shiva. These are the 5 stages for the removal of this atomicity so as the self attains purity. These stages represent the progressive union of consciousness, and this is called Bodha and Swatantriya. The limited individual in subject to ignorance or ajnana, according to Kashmir Shaivism, and they are of twofold, that is Paurusha and Bauddha. Paurusha ajnana is innate ignorance in the very soul of man. It is primal limitation, the original impurity of Anava Mala. Shiva alone can liquidate it. Anugraha or the grace of Shiva, or through the descent of Shiva's force, breaks up this limitation. Descent of force of grace achieves 2 purposes. First, Pashakshaya or the destruction of fetters, and secondly, Shivatva Yojana or restoration of Shivahood, which in effect means removal of atomic impurities. And becoming of Shiva as an essence is accomplished by the removal of atomic impurity, which alone can help us to achieve Shivahood. And he becomes qualified to reality fully and completely. To attain integral Shivahood, the Jiva must recapture the all-inclusive I, which has no idea of the object, by adopting appropriate means. The most important part of it is Diksha or initiation. Diksha awakens Kriya Shakti in the limited souls, which is devoid of Swatantriya. And the development of Kriya Shakti ultimately means the soul's ability to absorb and integrate the object. And in order to enjoy its inherent reawakened Shivahood in life, we must attain Bauddha or the knowledge which is veiled. This depends on the purification of buddhi through the study of Shastras and Vijaras. Bauddha is different from intellectual knowledge or philosophy. It is deeper in discipline than mere mental understanding. Philosophy and intellectual knowledge is actually a mere mental understanding according to Kashmir Shaivism. With the rise of Bauddha there dawns knowledge even in Audhi, and we attain liberation even in our life, and this is called Jivan Mukti. There are 2 four forms of, or four means of, for attaining the supreme goal of Shivahood, and they are Anupaya, Sambhava, Shakta, and Anava Ubaya. Through any of these means, the limited individual attains the rich treasure of his own true self. The state of Paramashiva. In the state of Paramashiva, there is no emergence and absorption of the universe. So, to sum up this topic, we can say that Triga philosophy promises to satisfy almost all sides of human nature of knowledge, love, and will. Shiva being unitary consciousness as such, the realization of Shiva gives knowledge of everything by identity with everything. To recognize oneself as Paramashiva means mastery and kinship Shakti, and this implies sovereign and unrestricted will. To sum up, we can say that Kashmir Saivism is one of the three important Advaita systems in Indian philosophy, and the other include the Advaita itself, Vijnanavada, and Madhyamika, and the fourth one is Kashmir Saivism. And here we see an amalgamation of the Vedanta with Shaivism, and actually this Kashmir Shaivism we find a parallel to Advaita system, or it's an aspect of Advaita system where Shiva is treated as the absolute reality. Thank you. Hope you have got a brief idea of the Kashmir Shaivism. It's given in detail in the e-text.